This video has been sponsored in part by Surfshark. There's this golden rule of horror media. The thing you don't see, that which is left to your imagination, is always more frightening than the moments of explicit shock or horror eventually depicted on screen.
I know I'm human. And if you were all these things, then you'd just attack me right now. So some of you are still human. This thing doesn't want to show itself. It wants to hide inside an imitation. It'll fight if it has to. But it's vulnerable out in the open. If it takes us over, then it has no more enemies. Nobody left to kill it. And then it's won.
So if show, don't tell is our accepted best practice for structuring a narrative in most kinds of visual media, then the reverse is true when it comes to the best horror media. Call it tell, don't show, or maybe even insinuate, but never fully reveal. It is far more effective to frighten your audience through abstraction, by obfuscating cause and effect, and by purposefully withholding information from the viewer. In other words, the more mysterious and opaque the story is, the harder your imagination must work to compensate. There is no better canvas for horror than the human mind. With this style of storytelling, the fear that the viewer imagines in their head will always end up being much more terrifying than what's eventually revealed to them. And no horror medium is more adept at this telling without showing approach than video games.
Monsters? They looked like monsters to you?
The interactivity of games forces the audience, the player, to immerse themselves in the experience in ways that simply aren't possible when you're just passively watching a screen. Games have the potential to be so much more frightening than movies because we're not just watching them, we're an active part of it. And when we look back at the history and evolution of the horror gaming genre, we have a cornucopia of standout titles to choose from that these principles apply to. But when we talk about the absolute best of the horror games ever made, there is always one title that comes immediately to my mind, and it is one that I've been wanting to cover on this channel for quite a while. Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly is one of the greatest horror games ever made, and it follows this golden rule of horror better than just about any game before or after it. Fatal Frame 2 is peerless in its ability to know exactly when to be subtle and when to pull its punches in order to conjure one of the most powerful and gripping slow burn experiences ever created by a horror video game.
What's wrong?
But it's not enough to say that this game is so frightening that it haunts your nightmares, although it probably will. The game is also masterful in how it interweaves its narrative, mechanics, and presentation in a way that allows each design element to play off of and strengthen the others. Fatal Frame 2 is an experience that's far greater than the sum of its parts, with each of its interlocking parts being already honed nearly to perfection. And as the plot and the mechanics unfold with superbly measured pacing, the game leaves an indelible impression, a half-remembered ghost that will haunt the corridors of video game history's collective memory, long after the credits roll. Fatal Frame 2, or Project Zero 2 in Japan and Europe, was released on the PlayStation 2 in late 2003 and 1 year later for the Xbox in 2004. Now, the first Fatal Frame game was well received and well reviewed, even if it didn't sell particularly well. I did a video on Fatal Frame not too long ago, and it's no exaggeration to say that this game stands on its own merits as a Criterion horror experience. But this sequel arrived like a goddamn bolt out of the blue. Fatal Frame 2 stands as one of those rare cases in media where the follow-up is far and away superior to the first installment in just about every aspect. Fatal Frame was already a pretty damn good game, but it is clear that for this sequel, a huge amount of work and introspection went into upgrading each game element and aspect of design. The clunky first-person camera controls have been refined and streamlined, finally with a controller option akin to modern FPS games. Environment art, audio production, and overall presentation are sharper and more impactful. The level design is even more fiendish. An intricate labyrinth of houses, sheds, and shrines whose knotted corridors you'll untangle with every key you acquire, every mystic seal you shatter, and every hidden passage you reveal. If the first game laid the groundwork for the series, it was Fatal Frame 2 that exploded the scale and scope of the experience to never-before-seen heights. To play Fatal Frame 2 is to experience the culmination of nearly a decade and a half of evolution in survival horror game design, stretching all the way back to Sweet Home. It is, without any hint of exaggeration, one of the most frightening, compelling, and eminently playable horror games ever made. I think about this a lot. Games like Silent Hill 2, if you ask 10 people what's the best horror game ever made, you'll probably get close to half of them naming Silent Hill 2. It is rightfully considered a pinnacle of horror gaming history, yet I personally always felt that the gameplay itself, the moment-to-moment direct game action on its own, was always just fine, if I'm completely honest. There's not much really wrong with it, and a lot of it is extremely right, but I bet that not one of those people who named Silent Hill 2 in this hypothetical questionnaire would have said so because they were thinking about the peerless gameplay, but their reasons will very likely be primarily narrative-based, which is fine. I totally agree with that. Many of the best curated video games ever made are comparably weak in gameplay. Just think of Planescape Torment, for instance.
Damn it.
And yet, here we have Fatal Frame 2, a game that I think did manage to refine its predecessor's moment-to-moment gameplay so much that it stands out as, yes, one of the most fun, or, well, engaging to play horror games ever made, not just of the PS2 era. Narratively, the sequel is a departure from the events of the first game. It is a standalone story in the same mythologic universe that takes place before, and has only a few relatively obscure direct links to the first Fatal Frame, which also answers the question, do I have to have played the first one to play the second? No, you don't. It completely works on its own, and because of its prequel nature, it can even be considered a chronologically more sound order to play. There are plenty of thematic parallels, though, that are satisfying to explore in whatever order you choose to approach the series. The narrative follows the psychic twin sisters Mayu and Miyu Amakura, who, in a peak of nostalgia for their favorite childhood playground, are drawn to the mysterious Minakami region in Japan.
A lost village.
Long ago, the name-giving town of Minakami simply vanished from the map in an unknown disaster. Local residents whisper of a mysterious crimson sacrifice ritual that is said to have failed in centuries past, plunging the land into darkness. And it is rumored that those who wander too deep into Minakami Forest will be trapped, cursed to forever haunt the land as a tortured undead soul. Armed with the mysterious Camera Obscura, the franchise's signature weapon, the player must once again delve into the dark heart of rural Japan to break the spell of a mysterious and suffocating ancient curse. But where the first Fatal Frame had you stalk the grounds and hallways of a single mansion, the sequel sees you exploring an entire village and its adjoining shrine complex. The entire map is packed with hidden Metroidvania passages and interlocking puzzles that require a good deal of backtracking. It feels vast when you enter it, but the more paths and passages you open up and explore, the more you realize how intricate, compact, and cleverly constructed the town really is. Minakami Village feels very believable, like a real place, and you'll never traverse it for more than 2-3 minutes tops from A to B, yet it feels like, over time, you've stood your ground across and learned the intricacies of an entire town, as you become familiar with every house, its owner's history and quirks, and its role in the villagers' peculiar cult activity. And while the player spent the entirety of the first game all alone, in Fatal Frame 2, the protagonist Miyu spends plenty of time with her twin sister Mayu in Tao. And here we can see another of the sequel's design additions that greatly enhances these themes of survival horror. While she's following you, your sister Mayu has a health bar, just like you. But she's also unarmed, which means it's entirely up to the player to defend her from creeping spirits and spectral booby traps. Now, many old established video game veterans might hear an alarm bell go off right now. Because we all know, having a helpless escort character the player must continuously defend can easily be one of the most frustrating experiences imaginable if it's done wrong. But I also want to stress how some of the arguably best video games ever made are surprisingly based around almost exclusively escort-based gameplay. Resident Evil 4 or Ico are just two examples that come to mind that nail this type of gameplay. Because if a game manages to nail this difficult challenge of protect your sidekick gameplay, the emotional incentive this creates to up the ante is priceless. And Fatal Frame 2 is no exception to this. To me personally, Mayu never once became a nuisance, despite her sometimes standing timidly in the way, and she's not a character that's solely defined by her helplessness, but we can visibly see her struggle against the curse's allure. She's fighting an internal fight which makes me all the more motivated to fend off all her constant harassers. And hey, one thing that's always important to make a companion character feel like they're not just a burden is an actual gameplay benefit for the player. And because Mayu attracts the ghostly adversaries far stronger with her presence, like she's the far more likely target, she conveniently acts as a decoy that makes it far easier to snap them with a perfect Fatal Frame kill shot. So as you struggle, sometimes quite mightily, to keep your poor sister safe, you'll witness firsthand her slow and grinding descent into a haunted madness, which leads to one of the most satisfying slow burn realizations of the game. Slowly but surely, you're starting to grasp that what you're witnessing in her is more than an isolated case. It is a terrifying glimpse at what awaits you should you fail to break the curse. Failure has catastrophic consequences, both for you and your soul twin.
This is how it was meant to be.
In a 2013 interview with Sony, Fatal Frame series director Makoto Shibata reminisced about the development and process of the second game. Tecmo was understandably not pleased that the first Fatal Frame game had sold so poorly, so the devs of the sequel were taking great pains to incorporate as much feedback as possible. And the harshest feedback the team can recall receiving: players who said the first Fatal Frame was so scary they couldn't finish it. Now, this time around, they didn't dial back the frequency or intensity of the scares. If anything, there are more of them, and they're even more expertly orchestrated. Instead, much more attention was paid to the pacing and structure of the narrative to ensure that the players would feel organically compelled by the story to continue onward. And all of this is underlined by an absolutely breathtaking, gut-wrenching sound design that does in no way need to shy away from genre legends like Yamaoka at all. Where the first game already delivered a thoroughly haunting acoustic scenery, Fatal Frame 2 cranks it up to 11 in almost every regard. One of Fatal Frame 2's greatest improvements over its predecessor are the revamped camera obscura controls. They're smoother and more responsive, and players now have more customization options. Like, especially if you play the game as someone very used to modern controller schemes, like left stick moves the character and right stick looks around, the first game did not deliver that, and it was very cumbersome to unlearn this conventional standard of moving a character around in a 3D space. The second game delivers that, and it is a big improvement. And in another departure from the original, Miu will be equipped with unlimited low-grade films when she first discovers the camera obscura. The games give you different types of films. The rarer they are, the more exorcism power they have. And in the first game, each type was limited, while in the second game, the weakest type of film is, as I said, unlimitedly available. Which might feel like it makes the game easier, but the player will need that extra ammunition, because there are far more spooks and scares, more terrifying ghosts, and more otherworldly puzzles that all require the clever use of the camera in this game. And where the first Fatal Frame could be completed in about 5 to 7 hours, the sequel weighs in at a solid 7 to 10 hours for a full playthrough, depending on your playstyle. None of which ever feels like empty filler content solely there to artificially pad out the game's length. And it is worth emphasizing how truly excellent and elegant Fatal Frame 2's interlocking gameplay systems are for the entire duration of the playtime. The chapters take place in various key locations of the village, and each of them, in and of itself, is an intricately crafted survival horror puzzle, comparable to the superb world and level design of a Spencer mansion from the original Resident Evil. Exploration is done in third person, giving you a wide and detailed overview of your environment. The game does a great job of making sure that important objects and cues are highlighted and centered for the player, but oftentimes it really demands your full attention. For instance, some objects in the game are cleverly hidden from the camera perspective when the players stand immediately next to it, but they're visible in another perspective when you're further away, or some objects are exclusively visible through the camera's finder, so you have to be very observant to not miss out on some of the best goodies hidden throughout Oggod's village. This is a stark contrast to the first game's propensity for throwing wild and uncomfortable camera switches at the player on a whim. Those dramatic fixed camera angles and sudden perspective changes are still present in the game here and there, but they're used to much better effect and with much greater sense of directional flair to them. Overall, the camera placement in 2 feels much more meticulously crafted and with much more thought and care put into establishing a cohesive feeling of natural flow than before. In order to see and defend yourself against the ghostly apparitions haunting Minakami Village, though, you must pull up your camera and enter a first-person POV. And all of a sudden, that gorgeous wide-angle perspective evaporates into tight-angled claustrophobia. Your viewpoint is suddenly constrained and cramped, and your character's movement speed gets cranked down to the snail on a sidewalk on a rainy day setting. Your enemies, however, are under no such constraints. They can zip around the place and dunk on you from any angle like it's a damn Space Jam.
You wanna hoop, so shoot, baby, shoot. It's time to hoop, so shoot, baby, baby. Come on and slam, and welcome to the jam.
These ghosts do a lot of damage when they grab you, and Miu and Mayu are only able to withstand a few grapples apiece. Enemy encounters in Fatal Frame 2 are claustrophobic, frenetic, and immersive in ways that few other games can match. And that's exactly because the game's designers understand when it is important to defy the player by denying them power and agency. Fatal Frame 2 is a horror game that denies the players a power fantasy without rendering them completely helpless, and this creates stress and tension without ever feeling sadistically punishing. And this results in some amazing jump scares that are, in fact, just regular moments of sudden peak intensity spontaneously emerging from the game's interdependent systems. Emergent jump scares, if you want to be all book smart about it. There are still plenty of terrifying and expertly choreographed shockers that take place in the cutscenes, pulled off with incredibly well-shot horror scenes that can easily stand their ground against some of the all-time greats in horror cinema. But the player is far more likely to encounter these piss-your-pants frightening moments while actively exploring and engaging with the gameplay systems in real time. And truly the most beautiful twist of the very nature of the camera as your weapon of choice gameplay is that the player cannot look away from the threat or close their eyes during these quote-unquote jump scares, like if it were a movie. In order to defeat these apparitions, you must steel yourself and face them head-on through your camera's viewfinder. You must withstand every ghostly wail, every grasp of a spectral hand, and every scream of bloody murder, because that's not really a camera obscura you're holding, that's a camera shotgun. Camera shotgun. This sounded way better when I was writing it. Camera shotgun gunner? You know what? Why don't we just take a break for a minute? You know what? This is actually a good opportunity to highlight the sponsor of this video, which is Surfshark. Now, being on the internet can feel a little bit like fighting your way through a Japanese haunted village at night, with invisible threats clawing at you from all angles and trying to leech off your life energy. I mean, it's a silly comparison, but seriously, just use a no-script browser add-on for a day and see how much of your personal data is being leached on by almost every website out there. It's mind-boggling, and that is just the tip of the iceberg of the ubiquitous and intrusive data mining. And to shield myself from this constant cyber surveillance, I've been using various VPN services over the years, and in recent months, I switched to Surfshark VPN to get rid of all those problems with an easy-to-use, all-in-one solution, and I've been really content with it. Their interface turns you anonymous and hard to trace online, with end-to-end encrypted data transfer, and that makes internet a lot safer and more enjoyable. It also gives you powerful geo-blocking possibilities, meaning that you can, for instance, watch streaming services like Netflix and co from different countries, or watch streaming services that are exclusive to certain countries like Hulu or IMDb TV that's only available in the US. And with Surfshark, I can circumvent these annoying copyright restrictions reliably and easily. If that sounds like something for you, you can use the promo code RagnarRox to get 85% off plus 3 extra months for free. And it comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee, so if you try it and end up don't liking it, you can just drop out, no questions asked, anytime, risk-free. I'll put the link to this offer in the description of this video.
Time to kick some ass.
Camera shotgunner. There we go. That's right, because the closer you are to the ghosts, the more damage you do with each snapshot. That was the whole point of the joke. The greater your risk, the greater the reward. All of these interconnected elements allow for a masterful interplay between theming and mechanics. The narrative evokes the fears and anxieties of being stuck in a dangerous and scary place and of being stalked by relentless foes. These feelings are then reinforced by and harmonized with the systems that comprise the game. Like our protagonists, Mayu and Miu, the player is at the mercy of a malevolent higher power, one who may at any moment shatter the flimsy barriers between the spirit world and reality. When Fatal Frame 2 was released in 2003, Japanese horror media was exploding in popularity. The 2002 remake of Ringu had been a smash success worldwide, and adaptations of other classic J-horror films like Ju-On and Dark Water were being rushed into production. As if people couldn't have just watched the originals, huh? Fatal Frame 2 does not disappoint on this front. It features a great many loving references and intertextual parallels to some of the most popular and striking moments in J-horror cinema. The game is very self-conscious about its identity as a proud piece of Japanese horror media, and it luxuriates in the tropes of its genre. But the true narrative triumph of Fatal Frame 2, and what makes it such an enduring and beloved horror game to this day, is how it uses these Japanese horror tropes to subvert the player's traditional notions of good and evil, just like the best horror cinema. Right and wrong, good versus evil, tradition and progress, and the value of an individual life when weighed against the well-being of the community. All of these dilemmas and more are posed to the player across the length of the game's narrative. The morality is grayer than the skies over Minakami, grayer than television tuned to a dead channel. Because as the story of Fatal Frame 2 is uncovered, we learn that the gruesome events witnessed in this game, and by extension the first Fatal Frame 2, were not the product of psychopathic, sadistic cultists, or of a household of mad, murderous nobles in the grips of shared psychosis. Mayu and Miu were drawn to Minakami Village because a long time ago, the Crimson Sacrifice ritual that is meant to protect the region failed. A vast portal to hell opened underneath the town where the unquiet souls of the dead gather and linger. And from that day onward, approximately once per decade, a pair of twins must reenact the Crimson Sacrifice ritual to seal them in. The game's lore emphasizes on multiple occasions that this was no brutal blood harvest imposed from on high, but that this might have been a sacrifice made willingly by all involved, a necessary evil done in the name of the greater good. These disasters might have been just the result of well-intentioned, regular people who were afraid themselves and trying to grapple with the outbreak of a supernatural apocalypse. And in order to save the village, they made the ultimate sacrifice and perpetrated the ultimate evil, torturing and sacrificing even innocent children in order to ensure their own safety. As the famous utilitarian saying goes, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Fatal Frame 2 asks the player, what do you do when you discover that you yourself are one of those unfortunate few? In good survival horror tradition, there are multiple endings to the game, depending on certain choices the player makes or doesn't make. All of the possible endings are incredibly poignant. Undoing the abyssal curse and sealing the hell portal always requires someone to make a dark, terrible sacrifice. There are no exceptions. That is, unless you're playing the 2004 Xbox Director's Cut, which added the Promise ending for players who complete the game on Nightmare difficulty that comes closest to a happily ever after. But getting to any of the endings will require fortitude on the player's part, no matter what, because the terror never lets up. But especially after replaying this game after many years, I'd honestly forgotten just how much, especially the ending of this game, slaps. Pardon my French. Like seriously, the various different outcomes of Mayu's Orphean venture into the forgotten depths of Minakami Village are so well made, so well orchestrated, so emotionally intense, and pull off their revelations and twists so masterfully. Anyone who remembers the revelation of how the phenomenon of the crimson butterfly came to its name knows exactly what I'm talking about. It's bone-chilling, it's poignant, gripping, it's gorgeous. And the icing on the cake is how satisfyingly the ending sequence concludes it all in the amazing credit song Chue, Butterfly by Tsukiko Amano. It's wonderfully of its time and it just gives me the chills every single time. Because I could really keep going on and on and on about how amazing this game really is. I mean, here I am gushing for God knows how many minutes already, and there are so many other wonderful, sumptuous, knock-you-on-your-ass moments that I haven't even touched on yet. Like how the heart-wrenching story is told through dozens of well-written lore notes, or so many imaginative environmental camera puzzles that cleverly employ the central mechanics in a meaningful way, or all the voice recordings that are actually pretty well acted, even in the American dub, and don't even get me started about the original Japanese dub. Or the sound design, man, I talked about it, oh my god, this is a headphone game for sure. Or how the ghost appearance is kind of randomized, and even after defeating them, they leave this after image. Wow. And like how much thought and care is being put into every little detail of the game's design. Like the ghost design that's bursting with neat little flourishes you won't catch at first glance. Like, did you know that the main antagonist, Sai, was a fantastically scary but also incredibly sad antagonist, wears her kimono right over left, which is the way corpses are dressed for a burial? Or how... I don't know, I could go on. This glowing recommendation, though, I'm giving right now comes with a big asterisk. At the time of release of this video, the only storefront that sells Fatal Frame 2 is Sony's PlayStation Network, and only for the PS3. There were some rumblings earlier this year about the series being ported to the Nintendo Switch, but not much else was heard since then. Beyond that, good luck hunting down a disc of a game which starts at about $50 used on eBay. I mean, it's still not as bad as Rule of Rose or Kion, but, you know. But yes, the classic and beloved masterpiece Fatal Frame 2 is yet another case where emulators and so-called pirates are doing a better job at preserving gaming history than the actual owners of the IP. But what else is new? So if you want to help preserve video game history, as always, I've provided a Google Doc in the description of this video with instructions on how to efficiently set this game up in the PCSX2 PS2 emulator. Those are the settings that I use for the footage in this video. And you can see that the high fidelity possible when emulating this game on a modern computer shows just how artistically and even technically well crafted this game was, that it still holds up to much higher technical standards than the PS2 allowed back in the day. It looks drop-dead gorgeous in HD. And even despite the lack of preservation efforts, Fatal Frame 2 still haunts the memories and imaginations of survival horror devotees everywhere. This is one of the few titles that can be declared without any hesitation or equivocation an absolute masterpiece of horror gaming, and one of the greatest survival horror games of all time. The PS2 was arguably the golden era of survival horror games, and as one of the finest examples of this historic lineup, Fatal Frame 2 can be considered an almost perfect horror game in every regard. But our journey is not over. As flawlessly crafted and meticulously polished this game is, people who know me a bit are aware that I'm a sucker for bold and daring imperfection. Which is why I can say that the moment I started this foray into the Fatal Frame series, I was excited to get to play Fatal Frame 2 again, yes. But even a little more so, I was the entire time extremely looking forward to eventually arrive at my secret favorite entry in the series, Fatal Frame 3: The Tormented. Yep, and I'm eager to talk at length about what makes this game even more special than the immaculate poster child Crimson Butterfly. So stay tuned. It's going to be a few videos from now. And lastly, I also want to clarify that one thing the game's lore forgot to mention is that sacrificing shrine maidens is actually not the only option in order to prevent the evil curse of Minakami Village. You can, alternatively, if you want to spare the lives of Miu and Mayu without the land being engulfed in darkness, also sacrifice Patreon supporters. And because Miu and Mayu have been through more than enough already, this is precisely what I'm going to do now. So, some of you may die, but this is a sacrifice I'm willing to make. Into the pit this time go Dr. Haley Isabella Cawley, Isabella Stoner, Andrew Hines, Wobbles and Bean the Wonder Ducks, Billy Lott, Kenan Ward, Ellen Wilder, Matt Gretton, Christine, Pablo Arcelis, Dimitas Latkov, Cordelia Crescendo, Ty McCandless, Chris Chan, Hunter Crawford and Margaret Strawn, Space Admiral Vivi, Catherine Escobar, Joey Monster, Murak Sardis, Alex Popov, Thwagam, Sophie Powelson, Agustin Ortega, Norbert Gerard Mattinga, Swallowtail Knights, Chris Z, Chuck Taylor, Evan Tekre, Nathan O'Connor, Max Macula, Nikot the Brave, Mauricio Reyna, Caspar Ram, Ronan Crom, aka Daniel 242172, Laird Wakala, David Zelenak, Puka Princess, Jin Hansen, Lawrence E. Buben, Adriel Garcia, Quentin Podom, Dana Rosa, Malim, Faulty Gear, Kevin H. Yang, Terry Collins, Jordan, Giselle Almonte, and Starina Abramson. Thank you all so much for fitting your life with the needs of the many. Until next time, ta-ta!